Hi, my name is Ladi. In this video, we'll show you how to build this particular bike. It's a 13 kilowatt hub motor bike with a motorcycle suspension, motorcycle front brake, nuclear controller, and 1800 watts external charger. The battery is 91 volts and it's 3.2 kilowatt power bank. It will easily take you through 80 kilometers per single charge. This bike is a complete beast. It has a 0 to 60 in like 8 seconds. It has a maximum speed around 100 kilometers an hour. It has a pretty sick controller with a beautiful user interface on a screen that has plenty of settings you can go through. You can change power modes, you can change how the torque responds, you can change absolutely everything. Let's dive in a video so you see what you actually have to do home once you purchase this particular kit.
First thing, we take the old headset out of the frame so we can install our new custom-made motorcycle headset. So we just hold a frame and use a harder wood, ideally harder than what I'm using, and hammer it in up until it's flat against the frame. When installing the rear shock bracket, keep the nuts from outside so they're not obstructing the battery. When you dismount the seat post, drill small holes so we can run a harness with a connector to connect the tail light. Once the seat post is down, it's smart to glue this included 3D printed zip tie holder. It will later help us hold the tail light wire. Tightening the seat post is next. Next, we scrape all the seals along the frame and properly clean it so we can start installing the 3D printed extensions that are custom made and are part of this kit. Apply one line of a glue because it works as a seal at the same time, so we don't have any water leaks when riding in a rainy weather. We use included bolts to tighten the extension in place so it sits nice and snug. The front parts of the extension, more towards the head, we purposely use wide washers to apply some pressure at the ends of the 3D prints. We have limited size of a 3D printer, that's why it's made out of multiple pieces. Some places that have no support, no option to screw with the bolts, we just apply masking tape to hold it in place. When you glue the side extensions at the bottom where battery sits, make sure it doesn't protrude from the frame facing up. So the battery actually sits on a metal frame and not on a 3D printed extensions. There is an opening from the bottom of the frame, so we have another small 3D print that we just place it in and glue all around it so it's nice and sealed, snug, and no water can splash through this opening inside of the frame and potentially cause any damage. First we apply the glue from inside, then we apply glue from outside. You can see some of the panels are a little bit looser. Once we have the glue open, we just glue all of these details at once. So we go around and glue these panels in nicely so they don't flap, they stay in place. That applies to the top panel as well. Degrease all the surfaces and again apply the glue from inside to nicely keep it in place. And this is the finished result. This is pre-made frame. This is external company building them, so we need to do all of these modifications to fit this big battery inside. So motor comes on wheels with spokes with the tires fitted. First thing we should install is the rear brake rotor. We include washers that need to go under the rotor, and we also include special extended bolts that will hold it in. We are doing this to purposely space out the rotor and bring it closer to the brake caliper. After you put the rotor in, there's this little washer that spaces the rotor away from the phase wires so you don't cut them through. That goes next. Freewheel is very easy to install. We just give it a few taps with a piece of metal. Front wheel has a motorcycle rotor, so you can see we're applying Loctite. On bolts you receive, it should already be applied, and you just tighten it to the hub. The swing arm went through a painting process and made the holes a little bit smaller. It's a very snug fit, so it's just much easier to drill through the holes and make them a little bit bigger. Use the included template, screw it to the frame like seen in the video, and drill the holes accordingly. Next we cut in between for phase wires, so we have a big opening for crimps and multiple wires to get to the controller that is placed under the frame, and we just make a little bit bigger holes on the top of the frame for positive and negative coming from the battery. Make sure all the edges are nice and smooth so we don't have any sharp edges that would eventually cut through the wire. When attaching the swing arm, we purposely insert the bolt from the right side in a direction of the riding, because the bolt would be obstructing all of you guys that decide to install ATS drive for high-speed pedaling. Installing the rear shock is very easy. You can notice that we use washers in between the shock and the bracket to space it out, because the shock is usually a little bit narrower than the bracket itself. We also include pre-cut tubes that is a spacer for the shock opening, spacing it out properly for the bolt needed for the brackets and the swing arm. We can move on to the head. First we tap in sockets from the top and the bottom for bearings. We grease in the bearings and place them from the top of the head. Then we can take the triple tree clamp, install the head axle and a bearing on the top of it. Top triple tree clamp only has this washer installed from the top that is spacing out the steering axle. Then we can assemble this whole head, use the spring washer and finally the nut and tighten it together reasonably so you can smoothly steer the head. And this is the phase we're in now. We can start installing the motorcycle front suspension. So we purposely measure how far out it's sticking out so it's even on both sides. And don't forget, when tightening these bolts, they need to have Loctite applied. You need to apply reasonable torque because you're bolting in aluminum, so the thread can be damaged. Installing handlebars is next. We just assemble the last part of the triple tree clamp and just bolt everything together in place. Don't worry about positioning the handlebars too much. You will do it later on when you can actually sit on a bike and see how the angle works out for you well. Front wheel has two different spacers. You can see the wider one, the longer one is on the side of a brake caliper, and they work as a spacers to center the wheel nicely. You can install the front brake first on a handlebar so it's easier to work with, and you have two bolts with washers holding the caliper in place. Again, the caliper comes with custom made adapter for this particular brake rotor. Installing the rear wheel with the motor is next. You can see we're installing these custom washers from both sides. It's much easier if you take these spacers installed to the frame off, so you can tap the swing arm nicely onto the motor. Then you can screw the brackets back onto the swing arm and make sure it's nicely spaced out on both sides. Then use washer, nuts, and don't worry about applying too much of a force. This is a rear wheel, this really does need to be tight. Lastly, screw in the bolt that secures the whole swing arm and prevents the slot from opening. We are usually shortening the seat posts on length and then attaching the seat to the seat post. So you can insert the seat post right after to the frame. Positioning the seat is smart to do roughly and adjust later on when you can actually sit on the bike. Immediately afterwards, we install the tail light and front light. So with the front light you get a bag with a lot of bolts. Don't worry about it, these bolts are for multiple different purposes. So just use the bolts and washers for the front light to attach together with our custom made 3D printed holder, and use the other bolts included in the packaging to screw the 3D prints together, clamp it to the handlebar and keep it tight enough so you can position the front light. Don't forget, you're screwing to a plastic, you need to be gentle. This is a regen lever that we purposely file off part of the lever so it doesn't obstruct the grip. We just hammer the grip in, position the front brake and tighten it all together. The other side we are applying the bicycle brakes, 3 power mode switch and a throttle. So you can sit on a bike at this point and see how the angles work out and adjust it accordingly to your preferences. We're gonna install the display next, and you can see in the packaging these 2 different bolts. So we're using the one on my right side for the 3D printed, custom made display mount. It's purposely designed so it can be inserted as the last part, so you don't have to go from a side of a handlebar. And this bolt holds together the aluminum mount for the display and also clamps the 3D printed bracket together. And then we use the bolt to attach the screen and adjust its position. Next are 3D printed front suspension mudguards. You receive these inserts and we use these pliers to push them in. You can also use hammer and hammer them in. Just again be gentle, don't forget this is 3D printed plastic that can break. This is how it's supposed to look like, and use the included bolts to tighten everything together, and lastly zip ties to organize the holes from the brake. Next, we run all the wires from all the handlebar components underneath so we can have a path that will be easy to zip tie together to handlebars and keep everything nice and neat. Everything coming in this kit is pre-crimped, so it's very easy for you to install. These crimps are not easy to do, so I think you will extra appreciate this plug and play system we created for your convenience. Let's look at the diagram together. When we go from the left to the right, the first connector is a system cable that goes straight from the controller. USB, we usually take that out, but it's additional, it's part of the package that you can have USB out of the display. Brake, that's where you plug our regenerative brake lever. Throttle is throttle, and then we go straight to 1/01, which is a programmable connector. That's where we plug the power mode switch. And 1/02, this is where we plug in the mechanical brake sensors. There are 2 screw sizes, longer and shorter, so don't mix them together, otherwise you might damage something. Lastly, we zip tie all the wires to the handlebars to keep everything neat. Rear bicycle brake requires this aluminum adapter we made and we include in a kit. We use 2 of these. It depends on what combination you have, what brake and what spacers. So for this particular swing arm with this motor, we use 2 of these adapters for the brake caliper. When tightening the caliper to the frame, make sure it sits with pads right on the rotor, and when looking from the back, it doesn't push the rotor on one side or another when pressing the brake. And we can organize phase wires from the motor, we run them inside of the frame, and zip tie everything to the swing arm. Very critical place here is when the wire is leaving the motor around the brake rotor. The wires really need to be tight, not to scratch through them with the rotor when riding. We can install the crankset. If you ordered ATS, you need to take the whole center bottom bracket out and install the whole new ATS from scratch. In this case, we're only installing the crankset. Chain tensioner is next. It's very easy, just bolting it to the swing arm. In this kit, you will receive adjusted length of the chain, so you just need to connect it together. We have this nifty tool that holds it together. You can use maybe a zip tie to keep the chain together and just take pliers and push the pin in to connect them together. Next, we can drill the charging port to the side panel. So we prefer installing it on the right side, and you need to measure first what the size of the connector is and drill the hole accordingly. We right away use the connector as a template to drill the holes, use washers inside, and bolt the connector together. We're degreasing the frame and bottom of the battery for the gluing phase. We include this custom-made aluminum bracket that supports the battery from the back and prevents from going too far to the back. And then we lift up the battery itself with the flat screwdrivers, flatten the nozzle of the glue and insert it in and do multiple big blobs of glue in there. The glue is included in this kit. When you're done with this phase, make sure you take the side panels, try to fit them in, making sure the battery is well positioned, and when it dries out, you'll be able to install the side panels correctly. If you prefer, you might screw the side panels together and leave the glue cure overnight to make sure you will be able to close them. Part of the controller package is this adapter. That's for Hall sensors, that is connecting the motor connector to controller connector. So on the motor you can see two same connectors, don't worry about one of them. That's a spare set of Hall sensors. Phase wires need to go below the battery. We purposely have this beautiful space there for the work, and we run all the phase wires straight below the frame where the controller is going to be placed. So we run positive and negative wires from the battery on the left and the right side, exactly where the controller's connectors are. And there is one red positive cable that is for charging that is connected with one of the phase wires. We can screw the phase wires to the controller. The colors don't really matter. Just one of the phase wires need to have this thinner gauge wire that is for charging. It's connected with one of the motor phase wires. The torque to tighten these bolts is 6 Newton meters. Positive and negative wires are also screwed to the controller. Then we install the Hall sensors, custom connectors, PVM for lights, and system wire from the display. Following with installing the cover for all the wires to keep everything safe. Then we can place the controller into the 3D printed cover, organize the wires neatly so they don't get squashed, and we can screw the whole cover to the frame. Again, I would highly recommend using Loctite, but it already should be on the bolts included. You can see when we're fitting the side panel, because we use the extension, the holes are a little bit off. So we just mark them and make the holes just a slightly bigger. It's much better than trying to screw into the frame on an angle and damaging the threads. We cut a hole for the side panel for the light that we keep on the left side. We install the light switch and plug the wire harness accordingly, as you can see in this video. This could have been done in an earlier phase. It is installing seal on the frame extension to keep everything waterproof when the side panels are installed. And then we can tighten the bolts and finish installing the side panels. Before we do the right side panel, we plug all the connectors together. They are purposely made so you can't swap them. And then we organize all the wires, tighten them with zip ties, and make sure nothing will rattle, nothing will move and eventually cut through. Same with the phase wires at the bottom. You can notice there are 2 sets of Hall sensors. We only need 1, so you can choose which one you plug in. And then we took this piece of foam and wrapped everything together to prevent rattling. And then we can run the tail light, zip tie everything to the seat and the seat post, keep the wires under the seat organized and zip tie together. This is where the 3D printed glued zip tie holder comes into place, where you can zip tie this wire neatly inside of the seat. Lastly, before installing the side panel, we plugged in this connector from XT90 and turned the breaker on. Finally, we can move to software settings. So first of all, you need to go to Nuclear website and download the latest software for the display and for the controller itself. Use the included microSD card and start with the display software. That needs to be the only file on the memory card. So copy it there, then you can go to the controller, insert it in a display, and then you just follow the settings. So you go to onboard computer, go to firmware update and press the green button. Then you go to onboard computer and you go to device info and you can see the software version. Then we need to go back to the computer, delete this file from the memory card, copy the controller update itself, go back to the controller, insert the card in and go to devices, Nuclear controller, down to updates and settings, update firmware, click on, and sometimes what happens to us that this freezes. This happens now and then, so we need to open the side panel and turn off and on the main breaker. This is the procedure. This video is sped up. If everything goes smoothly, this is what you should end up with. We as a prevention save the settings. I'm not sure if it's needed, but we do it. And then when you go to device information, you should see the latest software update. So again, take the memory card out, delete in the computer the file from the memory card, and use the link in the description to get our latest settings for this particular bike. So that's this nconfig. Place it in the memory card, go back to the controller, insert the memory card, go to devices, Nuclear controller, updates and settings, import config, switch to 1 and press. It usually throws in some errors, that's fine. We save the settings, now it's important, and your whole controller should be beautifully set up the way we prefer. One thing that doesn't copy usually is you need to go to extra parameters and change access level to advanced so you have all the settings available. And then we go to 1/0 config and scroll all the way down to PVM 105, change it to stoplight, and then min change to 100%, max to 0%. If for some reason these settings don't copy, and you should be good to go. If you're a geek and you would like to know everything about this controller, I would highly recommend reading the user manual provided on Nuclear's website. Let's perform the Hall test. Make sure the rear wheel is in the air, it's going to spin. And we as a prevention unhook the chain as well, so it doesn't have a back rotation and doesn't turn around paddles. We go to auto setup and we turn on full setup. It will require you to press brake, so do that. Then it will require to press throttle, do that. And now be careful, everything needs to be secured. The rear wheel is going to rotate quite high RPM. Once this is complete, press save settings and you're good to go. Now enjoy yourself by peeling off the protective foil from your newly built e-bike version 5. Enjoy! Now we have functioning light switch. Nuclear controller turns on from the bottom of the screen. This is how our beautiful custom charger looks like that is included in this kit. It's a 1800 watt charger, shipped with a socket for your country standard. It works on a 230 and 110 volt systems. In order to start charging, you need to turn the nuclear controller on. Then you plug in the charger and plug it into the bike. I would highly recommend turning the front light off for the time of charging because it's heating up quite a bit. The fully charged bike will be at 91 volts. If you're happy with your bike and you're pleased with our service, we would highly appreciate if you also glue the My Super E-Bike logos on your bike to help us promoting this business. And we also think it looks pretty sick with these Legos.
Very last thing, we use zip ties to strap them to the swing arm and cut them on length so they're barely touching the rim. And then we just go around the wheel and try to center it. It's usually from stock, from just lacing them. So we need to make sure they're all aligned. It's pretty easy, don't usually tighten just one spoke, it's usually like 3-4 around. And keep circling the wheel up until you have it perfectly straight. Once you're done, go all around and tighten all of them. Make sure it's snug. Same thing applies for the front wheel. We tighten the zip ties to the shock, cut it on length, and just rotate around and tighten and loosen whatever the rim requires. Very last thing before you take the bike for a ride is go around and make sure all the bolts are tight.
Thanks again to our sponsor Huge Casino. Click the link in the description to download Huge Casino for free today.